The night was thick with tension. Election night, 1856, in a small town in Virginia. Lanterns flickered in the windows of the grandest mansion in the county, the Rutherford estate. Inside, the master, Thomas Rutherford, sat in a high-backed chair, swirling a glass of whiskey in one hand and a cigar in the other. His laughter was sharp, cutting through the warm, humid air like a whip. He believed himself untouchable. The world bent to him. He owned land, wealth, and men, and he thought he even owned Benjamin. But Benjamin had been watching for years. Every insult, every strike, every command had been stored in silence, like coals smoldering beneath the surface. To Thomas, Benjamin was obedient, quiet, and harmless, the perfect servant to deliver drinks, light cigars, and wait silently in the corner. No one suspected that the very hands that polished Thomas's boots and lit his cigars would one day deliver his end. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and comment below. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? You'll want to remember exactly where you were when you first hear Benjamin's story. Benjamin's life had been shaped by cruelty. Born into slavery on the Rutherford estate, he had known nothing but chains, beatings, and fear. His father had been whipped to death for disobedience. His mother had disappeared one winter morning, sold to a distant plantation. Benjamin grew up learning patience, silence, and observation, waiting for the moment when the scales of fate would tip in his favor. As Thomas laughed that night, puffing cigar smoke into the warm room, Benjamin moved silently around him. He carried the tray with drinks, tilted the whiskey just so, and placed the cigars carefully within reach. He smiled faintly, a smile that Thomas never noticed, the smile of a man who has already won. The election results were about to be announced. Thomas had bet his pride, his money, and his influence on the outcome. He had no idea that the true power in the room was the quiet figure who polished his silver and watched his every move. Benjamin's plan was simple, yet ingenious. Over months, he had learned the habits of his master, the chemistry of cigars, and the way Thomas preferred each blend. One cigar, carefully treated by Benjamin over weeks, had been laced with a slow-acting poison, undetectable by taste, smell, or sight. The timing was deliberate, only to take effect once Thomas's attention was fully absorbed by the election results. He moved behind Thomas, placing a fresh cigar in the holder, offering it with perfect politeness. "Your favorite, sir," Benjamin said softly. Thomas laughed, raising an eyebrow. "You always know what I like." "Light it for me, Benjamin." Benjamin struck the match with steady hands. The flame flickered, smoke curled upward. And in that moment, Benjamin felt the weight of years of suffering and silent vengeance settle like a storm in his chest. As Thomas took a long draw, Benjamin stepped back, watching him, heart steady, mind sharp. Minutes passed. Laughter continued. The family and guests in the room didn't notice anything unusual. But slowly Thomas's face began to change. His laughter faltered. His hand trembled. He coughed violently, clutching his chest, eyes widening in horror as the poison took hold. Panic erupted in the room. Servants ran forward. Guests screamed. But Benjamin stood silent, watching justice unfold exactly as he had planned. By the time anyone understood what was happening, Thomas Rutherford was dead. His own cigar, the symbol of his indulgence and arrogance, had become the instrument of his demise. The aftermath was chaos. Investigators questioned everyone, but Benjamin had an alibi. He had been serving drinks, polishing silver, attending quietly. No one suspected the man they had treated as property, the one they thought was harmless and obedient. Yet among the slaves, whispers grew. Benjamin had done what many had dreamed of but dared not act upon. The rumor of his deed spread silently, inspiring fear and awe alike. Plantation owners looked over their shoulders, servants watched, their masters with new eyes, and the story of the slave who killed his master with a cigar became legend in that corner of Virginia. Benjamin didn't flee. He didn't boast. He walked quietly through the estate after the incident, carrying himself with the calm inevitability of a man who had balanced the scales of his life. He had delivered justice, clever and precise, without raising suspicion. One life taken. A lifetime of silence honored, Benjamin whispered to himself as he stepped outside into the cool night air. If you're still with me, comment below. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Benjamin's story is only beginning. The night of smoke and shadows has set a chain of events into motion that will change everything for those who underestimated him. After Thomas Rutherford's death, the estate was thrown into chaos. Servants scrambled, family members screamed, and neighbors hurriedly arrived to witness the aftermath. But amidst the chaos, Benjamin remained calm. Every movement, every glance, every word had been rehearsed in his mind for months. The man who had once been considered harmless now held absolute control over the story. And the truth was that no one would suspect him. That night he moved quietly through the corridors, extinguishing candles, arranging trays, and ensuring that no evidence pointed toward him. To the outside world it looked like the chaos of fate, an accident caused by Thomas's indulgence and careless lifestyle. But for Benjamin, it was justice served with precision. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and comment below. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? This night is about to reveal how Benjamin's quiet actions ripple far beyond a single mansion. Benjamin knew he could not stay on the estate. Even though no one suspected him, whispers traveled fast in small towns. He had to disappear, not just to protect himself, but to ensure the legend of what had occurred grew in the right way. Disguised as a traveling laborer, he slipped out under the cover of night, carrying nothing but a small bag of essentials and the memory of years of suffering. As he walked through the forested paths leading away from the mansion, he thought about the town's upcoming election results. Thomas had been a man of influence, and his death left a power vacuum. News would travel fast, and fear would spread among the elites who once looked down upon him. Benjamin realized that his quiet victory had sown seeds of chaos far beyond the estate. Over the next few days, townspeople speculated endlessly. Some claimed Thomas had choked on his cigar, others whispered about bad luck or divine punishment. Nobody considered that the obedient slave Benjamin had outwitted them all. Meanwhile, Benjamin observed from afar, noting reactions and understanding how fear could ripple through an entire community. He began planning his next steps. He was not motivated by greed or fame. He was motivated by balance and the lessons of suffering he had endured. Every powerful man who thought themselves untouchable became a potential target if cruelty guided their actions. Benjamin learned to move silently, to manipulate without detection, and to observe human behavior like a predator studying prey. One evening, Benjamin arrived at a small tavern in a neighboring county. He listened to travelers discussing Thomas's death, laughing about the strange accident. He let them speak freely, noting who was truly afraid and who mocked the tragedy. Every reaction gave him information about character, weakness, and arrogance. He realized that power was fragile and fear could topple it without violence, if applied carefully. At the same time, Benjamin's presence began inspiring others among the oppressed. Slaves from nearby plantations quietly took note of the man who had accomplished what so many had only dreamed of. Stories spread, whispered in the night. A man took his freedom, and Thomas Rutherford with it. These whispers carried both hope and fear, and Benjamin knew the story itself was a tool. It could warn the cruel, inspire the oppressed, and ensure his legend lived even without his presence. Election night itself continued to cast its shadow over the town. Political discussions turned to fear. Who would control the power left by Thomas Rutherford's death? Rumors of foul play spread, and Benjamin, unseen, watched the outcomes. He noticed patterns. Arrogance crumbled under scrutiny, greed faltered under fear, and the quiet observer could shape events more effectively than open confrontation. Benjamin's genius lay in invisibility. He could enter a house, a tavern, or a courthouse and influence events without touching anyone. His reputation had become a force of psychological power, far stronger than any weapon. The town didn't realize it yet, but the election, the rumors, and the chaos were now under the silent control of a man who had once been considered property. By the end of the week, the town had shifted. Families whispered in fear. Powerful men reconsidered cruel acts, and servants walked with newfound courage. Benjamin's presence, though unseen, had already reshaped the social dynamics of the community. He returned briefly to the outskirts of the Rutherford estate one night, looking at the mansion from the forest. It was quiet. The windows were dark. The once proud symbol of power now stood as a monument to the consequences of arrogance. Benjamin felt a calm satisfaction, but he knew his journey was far from over. There were more injustices to observe, more lessons to impart. Silently, invisibly, and inevitably. Power rests not in strength, he whispered to himself, but in patience, observation, and precision. The town had never been more tense. Rumors of Thomas Rutherford's sudden death had spread like wildfire, and whispers of foul play haunted the streets. Plantation owners and merchants alike scoured every corner, suspicious of neighbors, servants, and even family. Yet Benjamin moved quietly among them, unseen, unassuming, untouchable. Election night had brought more than votes. It had brought a psychological storm. Those who had once wielded cruelty as power now trembled in fear, unsure who might strike. Next, Benjamin had realized early that fear itself was the most powerful weapon, more precise and enduring than any blade or fire. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and comment below. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? The events of this night will show you how one silent man turned the arrogance of an entire town against itself. Benjamin had spent weeks preparing for this moment. He had studied the habits of the town's elite, their late-night meetings, private drinking rituals, and careless indulgences. He knew exactly where to plant doubt, where to provoke paranoia, and where to let chaos take root. As the town gathered in the main hall to hear election results, Benjamin slipped in among the crowd. He appeared to be just another observer, another man watching history unfold. But every glance, every subtle gesture, and every whispered word from him triggered suspicion in the hearts of the powerful. "Did you see him?" one merchant whispered nervously to another. "Which one?" the other replied. "That quiet man. He watches too closely." Benjamin allowed the fear to grow. No one suspected him, but every subtle move, every silent observation, had placed him at the center of their unraveling. As the votes were announced, Benjamin's plan unfolded perfectly. Key members of the town's elite began to accuse one another of tampering, bribery, and betrayal. Long-hidden grudges surfaced in heated whispers. Arguments escalated. A duel of words, fueled by fear and suspicion, erupted in the hall. Benjamin did nothing. He simply watched, like a shadow orchestrating a symphony of chaos. He had realized that true power was not in taking life directly. It was in manipulating the minds of those who believed themselves untouchable. The town tore itself apart, driven by paranoia, greed, and the weight of its own secrets. Outside the hall, servants and freedmen whispered among themselves. They spoke of Benjamin in reverent tones. He did what no one dared to dream. He moved silently, but the world bends to his hand. Word of the election chaos reached neighboring towns. Plantation owners grew cautious, questioning every decision, fearing unseen consequences. Benjamin's influence spread beyond the boundaries of a single estate. With no weapons, no armies, no public recognition, he had reshaped the social order. With fear, cunning, and a single act of precise vengeance. The climax came late that night. One powerful man, drunk and arrogant, attempted to confront Benjamin directly. You're the one behind this, aren't you?" he accused, pointing. Shakily, Benjamin's eyes met his, calm and unwavering. A faint smile appeared. "I observe," he said softly. "I listen, I wait. The consequences are yours to bear." The man's face paled. Panic overtook anger. Others in the room saw it, and the fear spread like wildfire. Benjamin did not need to act physically. The psychological weight of his presence was enough to dismantle power structures far more efficiently than any rebellion. By the end of the night, the town's elite had been forced to reconsider every decision they had ever made. Arguments were forgotten in the face of fear, conspiracies unraveled, alliances shattered. Benjamin disappeared as quietly as he had arrived, leaving behind a town forever changed by one man's patience, observation, and precision. As dawn broke, Benjamin walked alone through the misty streets. He glanced back at the hall where the election had descended into chaos. The smoke of cigars and the scent of fear lingered in the air. He had accomplished more than revenge. He had redefined power, showing that the quiet, invisible, and observant could topple the proudest of men. "Justice is never loud," Benjamin whispered to himself. "It arrives quietly, and it cannot be ignored." The legend of Benjamin began to grow. Slaves shared his story in secret. Plantation owners spoke his name in fear. Townsfolk remembered a man who had turned smoke into death, silence into power, and observation into an unstoppable force. Weeks had passed since election night, but the aftershocks of Benjamin's actions still rippled through the town. Plantation owners, merchants, and politicians all moved cautiously, fearful of invisible consequences. No one could explain what had truly happened, but everyone felt it. A shadow, an unseen hand that had reshaped the hierarchy, leaving the arrogant trembling. Benjamin had vanished, blending into the forests and the outskirts of neighboring towns. Yet his influence lingered everywhere, in the whisper of slaves on their way to the fields, in the cautious glances of wealthy men, and in the subtle suspicion between families who once considered themselves untouchable. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and comment below. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? The legacy of Benjamin is not only about action, it's about the fear and change that followed him silently. The town began to fracture under the weight of paranoia. Men who once held absolute control found themselves second-guessing every servant, every neighbor, every decision. Every misplaced glance or hushed conversation was now a potential threat. Some families tried to maintain normalcy, but the legend of Benjamin had already altered their perception of reality. Slaves, meanwhile, quietly celebrated the tale of the man who had struck the powerful without violence. It became a story of hope. The oppressed could see justice delivered, even if by stealth, cunning, and patience rather than brute force. Parents whispered it to their children at night. Remember, strength is not always in hands or weapons. Sometimes it is in silence and observation. Benjamin, from afar, watched. He observed not with anger, but with careful attention. He noticed small patterns of cruelty still existing in the neighboring estates and towns. He began to subtly influence outcomes, planting seeds of doubt, fear, and accountability. A careless plantation owner would suddenly misplace accounts. A greedy politician would argue with his own allies. Benjamin had learned that psychological precision could topple power far more effectively than violence ever could. Through this strategy, he became more than a man. He became a symbol. Stories of a silent, calculating presence spread from town to town. People claimed they felt him watching, even if he was nowhere to be seen. His legend became both warning and inspiration. Plantation owners feared him. Slaves revered him. The line between myth and reality blurred. Meanwhile, the immediate aftermath of Thomas Rutherford's death continued to haunt the original town. His widow, family, and allies suffered constant suspicion. Business deals failed, land disputes erupted, friendships shattered, all because of the fear that Benjamin had instilled. Even the local magistrates, who were supposed to maintain order, found themselves hesitant. Every case, every verdict, every decision was made cautiously, for fear of some unseen retribution. Benjamin's influence, though invisible, had penetrated the very core of governance and society. One evening, an old servant whispered to a young boy, "Remember Benjamin. One day, he'll teach you what patience and cunning truly mean. Never underestimate the quiet ones. They are the most dangerous of all." Benjamin's presence was a constant reminder of balance, justice, and inevitability. He had not sought recognition or glory. He had acted with precision, with purpose, and then disappeared, leaving the town forever changed. In the years that followed, those who had underestimated him lived in quiet fear, while those who remembered his story, slaves, townsfolk, even former servants, understood the power of patience, observation, and calculated action. Benjamin had become an invisible law of morality, a shadow that demanded respect. Years had passed since Benjamin walked away from the Rutherford estate and the election night chaos. The town, once vibrant and proud, had become quieter, subdued, haunted not by ghosts of the past, but by the psychological shadow of a single, calculated man. Plantation owners no longer moved with arrogance. Servants no longer bowed blindly. Every action, every decision was measured, because the legend of Benjamin lingered like smoke, invisible yet suffocating. Benjamin himself had disappeared into the forests and backroads of Virginia. He had no intention of seeking glory. He had no need to. His legacy was already etched into the fabric of the town, and his story had become the ultimate warning. Cruelty leaves scars, and patience can be deadlier than the sharpest blade. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and comment below. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Benjamin's journey is ending, but the lessons it leaves are eternal. He reflected on his life in silence. Born into bondage, forced to endure pain and oppression, Benjamin had learned early that patience was power and observation was survival. Every insult, every act of cruelty, every injustice committed against him or others was recorded, not in ink, but in memory. Those memories became weapons, refined over years into a precise, unstoppable force. The night he placed the poisoned cigar into Thomas Rutherford's hand was not an act of rage, but of inevitability. He had waited, calculated, and observed until the moment was perfect. Every subsequent action, from manipulating the town's elite to inspiring fear and respect among slaves and townsfolk, was executed with the same precision. Benjamin's genius lay in psychological mastery. He understood that the greatest power often resides not in violence, but in subtlety and perception. In the years that followed, the town's stories of Benjamin multiplied. Slaves told their children, "The quietest man may hold the loudest power." Merchants and politicians whispered his name in fear. Some claimed to see him in the shadows, observing silently. Some swore they felt a presence guiding justice in unseen ways. The legend had grown far beyond a single act. It had become a force of morality and terror. Benjamin never intervened again with violence. He no longer needed to. His presence alone, the memory of what he had accomplished, reshaped behavior and decisions throughout the town and beyond. The invisible hand of justice he had established was enough to prevent cruelty and to maintain balance. One night, as Benjamin sat by a river, watching the reflection of the moon ripple in the water, he whispered to himself, "I have given justice where it was denied. I have turned silence into power, observation into inevitability, and patience into the sharpest weapon. Now I vanish, leaving the world forever changed." He stood, faded into the darkness, and became nothing more than a shadow in the night. The river carried no evidence of him. The town knew only the results of his actions. Families remembered the fear, slaves remembered hope, and the elite remembered that even the quietest among them could hold the deadliest power. Benjamin's story endured in whispers and legends, carried on the lips of the oppressed, feared by the powerful. It became a symbol that justice does not always roar. Sometimes it smiles quietly, waits patiently, and strikes when the time is right. Power is not in the hand that strikes, the old stories said. It is in the mind that waits, watches, and understands the inevitable. Even decades later, Benjamin remained unseen, yet every plantation, every town, every whispered warning about cruelty and arrogance bore the imprint of his influence. The man behind the smoke had vanished, but his shadow stretched across generations, a reminder that justice, cunning, and patience are timeless forces.